Sarah sat motionless on the couch, while her Uncle Adam stood a few feet away, the glow of the fireplace dancing over the room. Despite being quiet, his voice was full with emotion. "Sarah, you don't get it. I had been suppressing this for years." He moved closer, his eyes meeting hers, and she blinked, gasping for air. He whispered, his palm grazing hers, "Tell me to leave if this is too much." The warmth of his touch sent goosebumps down her spine, making her heart beat. Family get-togethers were always a flurry of laughing, stories, and cherished memories, a mixture of mayhem and coziness. The yearly winter gathering was the same for Sarah, but this year it was held in her Uncle Adam's remote cabin in the woods. Adam, the younger brother of her mother, had always been a bit mysterious. His gentle charm and rough manner had always set out from the rest of the family, although he was only a little over 10 years older than Sarah. His intelligence, his self-assurance, and the way he seemed to control a room without trying were all things Sarah had always admired in an abstract sense. However, something felt different this year. Perhaps it was the cabin's cozy atmosphere, or the way Adam seemed to focus on her for longer than normal. Sarah was unable to deny the subtle change in their chemistry, whatever it was. After dinner on the second night of the trip, the family gathered around the fireplace. As Sarah sat by the fire, absorbed in her thoughts, the room was alive with conversation. With a glass of wine in hand, Adam joined her. He smiled slightly and remarked, "You seemed like you could use this." She accepted the glass and said, "Thanks." As usual, their talk flowed naturally as they engaged in informal conversation. However, the tone between them changed as the evening went on, and the others started to go to sleep. Adam replied abruptly and softly, "Sarah, you've matured so much." Her cheeks flushed as she looked at him. "Thanks, I suppose." "No, I really mean it," he added, maintaining a steady glance. "I don't recognize you as the same child. You're amazing." She was taken aback by the flattery and found it difficult to respond. Her voice trailed off as she managed, "That's sweet of you to say." Adam's face became more grave. "I'm not merely being nice when I say this. You ought to be aware of that." As Adam's comments lingered, the tension between them increased. Unsure of how to handle the unexpected intensity of the situation, Sarah felt her heart race. She stood up and reached for her empty glass, saying, "I think I'm going to call it a night, Adam." But his hand briefly touched hers as she turned to go. "Wait, Sarah." She turned back to him and froze, her heart pounding. "What is it?" His jaw tensed as he paused. With caution, he said, "I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I have something to tell you." As she waited for him to go on, her stomach turned. "All right. I've been suppressing this for a while," he said quietly. "I can no longer pretend, even though I know it's wrong. I know I shouldn't, yet I feel something for you." Sarah's mind was racing and her breath caught. "You can't, Adam. We can't." "I understand," he broke off, his eyes intense. "I had to say it, though. You have a right to know." She gazed at him, her feelings battling inside of her. "This is crazy," she muttered. "You're my uncle," he retorted, only by title, in a forceful yet vulnerable voice. "Sarah, we're only two people. That's my perspective." As she looked into his eyes, her own emotions jumbled and overpowering, her chest constricted. "This is so complicated, Adam." "It is," he said, taking a step forward. "However, if you order me to go, I will. I won't bring this up ever again, if you say the word." The words were on the tip of her tongue as her lips parted. However, they refused to come. Rather, she remained motionless while Adam drew closer, his hand grazing hers. Before she could stop herself, she leaned into him, her breath catching as their lips connected in a hesitant kiss. The warmth of his touch sent a shudder down her spine. Weeks, possibly years, of repressed feelings poured over as their restraint broke and the kiss grew deeper. Sarah's fingers got caught in Adam's hair as his hands moved to her waist, drawing her in. She said against his lips, her voice shaking, "You're impossible." "And you're unforgettable," he answered in an impassioned voice. As they fully gave in to the connection they had been resisting, the room, lit only by the flickering fireplace flames, became their cocoon. Through the huge windows of the cabin, Sarah was awakened by the gentle light of dawn. The previous night's events rushed back, tightening her chest. Adam was seated with his back to her on the edge of the couch when she turned around. She broke the silence by whispering, "We need to talk." He answered in a sad voice, "I know." She went on, but her words lacked confidence. "This can't happen again." Adam's look was troubled as he turned to face her. He stated resolutely, "I don't regret it. However, I will honor your choice." Footsteps rang out from the corridor before she could reply. The happy, unaware voice of her mother called out, "You too, good morning. The coffee is ready." Adam stood and gave Sarah a small smile, but Sarah's heart was pounding. He muttered, "We'll work this out," and turned to leave. Sarah and Adam glanced at each other briefly as the family sat down to breakfast, their secret boiling just below the surface. However, as the day went on, Sarah couldn't get rid of the thought that this was just the beginning and that they would never be able to cross the line again. Sarah experienced constant anxiety about being discovered throughout the day, making it feel like she was walking a tightrope. The silent tension that lingered between them was heightened by Adam's lingering stares across the breakfast table and the way his hand touched hers when he gave her the coffee. Happily oblivious, her mother talked animatedly about the day's preparations for the family. "You're joining us on the hike, Adam?" she inquired in a positive tone. Adam nodded after giving Sarah a quick glance. "Obviously," he said with ease. The idea of spending the day so close to him, their secret seething beneath the surface, made Sarah's stomach turn. She averted her eyes and concentrated on her food, but her thoughts were racing with feelings. The sharp winter air pricked their faces as the group headed into the woods. Sarah followed in the hopes of gaining some space, but Adam retreated to walk next to her. His voice was so low that only she could hear him say, "You're awfully quiet." Keeping her eyes on the floor, she answered, "I'm just tired." "Sarah, we must discuss last night," he demanded in a somber tone. She turned to him and stopped suddenly. She snarled, looking forward at the rest of the family. "Not here." Adam's face grew softer. Afterwards, he stated, "This cannot be disregarded." Sarah found herself in the living room later that night, peering into the dwindling embers of the fireplace after the family had gone to their rooms. She didn't need to turn to recognize Adam when she heard footsteps behind her. His voice was gentle as he asked, "Couldn't sleep?" She put her arms around herself tightly and shook her head. She acknowledged, "I can't stop thinking about it." He shifted to stand next to her, his body steady and warm. "I can't either." Her eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and longing as she glanced up at him. "This cannot occur again, Adam. It's excessive. Too dangerous." He extended his hand and brushed a lock of hair away from her face. His voice was hardly audible above a whisper when he added, "I know. However, that doesn't lessen its reality." His hand hovered close to her cheek, and the air between them thickened. His eyes were sharp as he replied, "Tell me you don't feel the same, and I'll leave." Her words became stuck in her throat and her breath caught. Her emotions would not allow her to say what she felt she should. Rather, she brought them closer together with a desperate kiss that was brimming with all the feelings she was unable to express. Adam answered right away, encircling her with his arms and drawing her in. They had an electric connection, and each touch stoked a fire that engulfed them both. She trembled as she spoke against his lips. "You're driving me crazy." In an emotionally charged tone, he answered, "And you're all I think about." As they surrendered once more, the room became their haven, and the outer world vanished into emptiness. Dawn was softly coming through the cabin's windows as Sarah woke up. The night's events replayed in her thoughts, and her heart sunk. She looked at Adam, who was already up and seated in a chair by the window, and sat up, wrapping the blanket around herself. She broke the quiet by whispering, "We can't keep doing this." His face was composed but determined as he turned to face her.
"I understand," he said.
"However, I'm not prepared to let this go." "Adam," she said in a shaky voice, "what happens if someone discovers? Then, what happens to us?" "We'll deal with it," he stated decisively. "With each other." The sound of voices drifted up from the kitchen before she could reply. As the day dawned and their family awoke, the burden of their secret became more pressing than before. Adam took her hand and held it steadily as they got ready to meet the family. "Sarah, this isn't over," he said. "I mean it." As they headed downstairs, she nodded, her chest constricted. In sharp contrast to the tempest that was building inside of her, the air was filled with the aroma of coffee and pancakes. Unaware of the animosity that existed between them, her mother gave them a kind greeting. However, Sarah continued to feel as though someone was observing her throughout the morning. Later, when she went outdoors to get some fresh air, she sensed someone following her. She turned and saw Emily, her cousin, with an unreadable look. Emily said, "Sarah," in a wary tone, "last night I saw you and Adam." Sarah's breath caught as her heart halted. Emily interrupted in a quiet voice. "Don't worry. I will remain silent. However, exercise caution." As Emily left, Sarah was left to bear the burden of what she had just disclosed, and her chest constricted. As the evening wore on into the night, the house became quieter. With the burden of the day bearing down on her, Sarah perched on the side of her bed. She kept hearing her cousin Emily say, "Be careful." She was surprised by a gentle knock on her door. She crossed the room and opened it after hesitating, her heart pounding. Adam stood there looking solemn, but with a hint of something she couldn't quite identify. Perhaps remorse or longing. "May we speak?" he said quietly. After making sure no one was nearby by looking down the hallway, Sarah moved aside to let him in. The sound of the latch clicking reverberated in the silence as he shut the door behind him. "This must end, Adam," she said, her voice shaking. He looked directly into her eyes and said, "I know. But Sarah, you're always on my mind. I can't act as though last night didn't occur." She struggled to settle herself and turned aside, crossing her arms. "This is crazy," she muttered. "We are related. People will never comprehend." He moved closer and continued, "Then let them think what they want. My feelings for you are genuine. I am aware that you also feel it." As his words set in, she felt her breath catch. "It's not that easy, Adam," he said in a low, passionate voice. "It's never going to be simple. However, that doesn't lessen its reality." His hand extended out and touched her cheek as she turned to face him. The barriers she had been attempting to put up between them started to fall apart as the warmth of his touch sent a chill down her spine. Her voice was shaking as she whispered, "I shouldn't want this." "But you do," he said, maintaining a steady gaze. Before she could react, he moved in and planted a slow, purposeful kiss on her lips, releasing all they had been suppressing. Her hands moved to his shoulders as the kiss intensified, melting her determination as she answered. Her voice was tremulous as she muttered, "You're impossible," against his lips. "And you're unforgettable," he answered in a passionate tone. Adam led her to the bed, cautious but assured, as though enjoying every second. The weight of their connection seemed to consume them completely, making the room appear to contract around them. They froze when they heard footsteps in the corridor, just when the tension was at its highest. The subtle groan of floorboards made Sarah's heart race. With terror in her voice, she murmured, "Someone is coming." Adam hurried to his feet, adjusting his shirt and heading for the door. He opened it and looked out into the dark corridor. He turned back to her after a moment, his face grave. "It's Emily," he muttered. A gentle knock on the door made Sarah's stomach drop. Quickly, attempting to look calm, she rearranged her attire and opened it. As she stood there, Emily's eyes darted between them. She responded quietly, "I knew it," in a tone that was more inquisitive than accusing. Sarah said in a tremulous voice, "Emily, it's not what you think." Emily interrupted her with a raised hand. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she added, "I'm not here to judge. However, you too must exercise caution. People will take notice." Adam took a step forward, his face composed yet stern. "We will," he declared. "I'm grateful." Emily nodded slightly, then turned and walked away down the corridor. Sarah breathed shakily as the door snapped shut, her hands shaking. "This is a catastrophe," she whispered. Adam steadied her with his grip as he drew her into his arms. "We'll work it out," he murmured quietly. With each other, Sarah's thoughts was still racing, yet there was a peculiar calmness about him. They would confront whatever lay ahead, no matter how difficult or prohibited.